I remember getting to see a bit of the preview of this prior to it, but seeing this again now on the big screen and those words of Fannie Lou Hamer just ringing out, and it's such a time that resonates with so much of what's happening in this country still today. I am so uh, thank you to PBS and to WGBH for helping to present this with World Channel America through America Refrained. Um, you know, this is really an opportunity for us to really think about and celebrate her contribution to this country, and um, in an opportunity with this film coming out to be able to share it with everyone else that needs to know about and remember her. So excited and really honored. I'd like to actually, we can bring the panel up on screen. I would love to have the audience just do a round of applause to congratulate both Monica and Joy for such an amazing film. Tremendous, and all of these emotions that I have. But without further ado, I had introduced the panel earlier. I'm going to turn this over to our wonderful moderator, Callie Crossley, to lead us in this discussion. And we'll be back to help with facilitating some questions from the audience. So hopefully you will hold on to those for the end. Thank you. Oh, hold on a second. We are just fixing the audio here.
Callie, I think you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, Callie, you're on mute.
All right. Thanks, Susan. I want to start with you, Monica. You worked very hard to bring the film, make the film a reality. What did it take to get it to the film and before us now?
We don't have the time for me to go into that discussion. The highlights: a lot of perseverance, determination, willpower, patience, a lot of clinics for a lot of tears, the crying. It just really was a process. The most difficult thing about getting this film to where we are now, funding was a major part of it. It's hard to fund projects like this, and that's one of the things that took us so long. And then just getting direction, knowing who to go to get it to this point. And once we had that, it seemed like things took off. But even then, funding was still an issue. So yeah, just a whole lot.
Now, for people who didn't know her, having watched the film now, and for those of us who did know her before, we know that her name should be right up there with Rosa Parks or John Lewis in terms of recognition, in terms of contribution to the civil rights movement. What can we say about it? What do you think it is? That why is it her name not where it should be and not so recognizable? Just to you, Monica.
I think, okay, yeah, I think Joy explains this so much better than I could, but from what I've heard her say, I mean, you think about it, look at Aunt Fannie Lou, and even though, in my opinion, I believe Aunt Fannie Lou was a lot more vocal than Rosa Parks ever was. I actually knew Mrs. Parks, and she was a very soft-spoken person, a very shy person. I don't think she was capable of raising her voice. But when you look at, her image, and then you look at Aunt Fannie Lou, Mrs. Parks was very well spoken. Aunt Fannie Lou came from the cotton fields. And so, as I've said, I've heard Joy say this, she was not the perception or the personification of what they thought a civil rights leader or human rights leader should look like. And that's a shame, because that still carries down today. People have this perception of what the right body type, what the right language or expressions should look like, sound like. Thank you. What the right or appropriate image should be, and that's not always correct. And so she was rejected, of course, by those who opposed her, but then also by her own people who didn't think that she personified the image of or their message.
So Joy, when did you know Mrs. Hamer's story? When did you understand who she was? I'm talking about before you got involved in the film. Yeah.
I first heard her name when I was in my senior year in my undergraduate program at Florida State. So already a grown person. And even then, I didn't know her or understand her. She was kind of a bit player in these political games I was learning about as a rhetoric student. So it wasn't until my graduate program when I started doing oral histories with people who actually knew her that I started to get a glimpse and see just the kind of the gigantic influence that she had on every soul that she touched.
In making the film, and we've now heard part of the struggle of doing that, I first want to pause because people in the audience will be filmmakers, people who know film, and some people will just look at it and enjoy it and not understand how very difficult it is that you chose the method but to tell her story, to use her voice, to use other people's voices, and that's it, and knit together a narrative is 3, 4, 10 times more difficult than doing a more familiarly narrative film in which you would have, you know, her on camera and other people speaking in, and then she did this, and then we did this, and then there's some narration. This is infinitely harder. And this is your first film. So why did you elect to go this way?
Well, you kind of answered it right there, because it's my first film, and 10 years ago, I was real cocky. I just said, like, yeah, this is how it needs to be. And all along the way, people kept telling me, like, bless your heart, don't do it that way, darling. Like, you're going to have so much trouble. And I was like, no, this is the only way to do it. So, you know, because it's my first film, I kind of had the courage of my ignorance to just like say, no, I'm going to do it the right way.
Okay. Well, it's masterfully done in that way because, and of course you had great material because she's a great singer as well as someone who could speak well. Despite her 6th grade education, she was very well spoken, which I think we all got a chance to see. So I just want to do a little first, coming back to you, Joy, but I want to do a little round robin with our other guests to ask each of you, when did you know, Christine, anything about Fannie Lou Hamer and understand who she was?
Honestly, this was the first time.
Okay.
To actually even learn, even as a civil rights activist in this space, I'm still learning. And there's so much more to learn about our history that we're just, it's not being told. So I'm really grateful for this film. And I can't wait to, like, you know, share it with other communities who are just now emerging and really need to learn this history and how it's related really about what's happening today.
Okay. Mimi, same question to you.
You know, I appreciate the question because it is still very much so new, right? And like Christine, we're out there in the trenches, we're doing this work, but we don't uplift the kind of unseen, unspoken leaders as much as we need to. And here is this powerful woman, Black woman, who like took her own like sacrifice, love for her people and said, I'm gonna take this journey because somebody has to. So I just wanna say, I really appreciate Monica, Joy, the time and energy that you all put into this. And I'm hoping that we can share it here locally to the world. Thank you.
Tanisha?
I believe it was in college when I first learned about Fannie Lou Hamer. But I just want to echo this piece about the fact that there are so many untold stories, so many untold powerful stories and testimonies that we need to start lifting up. Stories of people of color, stories of women, stories of those in the LGBTQ movement who are really those who have gotten us to this point in our history, who are not forgotten, they're just not known about. And so I'm excited about this one. And I look forward to the stories that are to come.
And I would just add that Tanisha and I share one thing and we share it with Fannie Lou Hamer. She was an honorary member of the distinguished and dynamic sorority Delta Sigma Theta, and we are both members of that. So Delta recognized who she was in 1968 Thank you very much. I just want to put that on the table.
Indeed.
I want to go back to Monica, you and Joy once again, because as you're starting to put this together, both of you actually in some ways came to the project with a lot to learn. You were quite young when your aunt died, Monica. So I'm wondering, did you have a sense of the community respect and love, even if the greater world didn't know, or maybe they didn't know at that point? Did you have that sense, or when did you have that sense as you started learning more about your aunt's whole story?
Actually, it was in high school, maybe latter part of grammar school, high school, because I've always loved history. And so when I really began to recognize her influence, I was in high school. I was a teenager. And I really didn't do, anything with it, unfortunately. A lot of the reading and research I did was superficial because this was telling my age, pre-internet, pre-Google. And so in order to do any kind of extensive research, you had to go to the library. You had to go to the card catalog and look it up and, pull the books and all of that. And so it just really wasn't a lot of material. I've learned more about her in the 10 plus years working on this film than I've ever known in my life. And one of my biggest regrets, unfortunately, is that when I really started to dig into who she was, not just the activism side, the humanitarianism, but I wanted to know a lot more of the personal story because that's the focus I wanted this film to take. The people who could really help me, my grandparents, my uncles, even Aunt Fannie Lou's husband, my Uncle Pap, they were gone. And so, my mother, of course, has told me stories my entire life. I have other uncles and aunts that are still around. But see, even my mom was a teenager when she, was active. And so she just doesn't recall a lot. And so I really regret that. And I appreciate, I think it was Tanisha saying earlier about the stories. Everybody has a story. Every single person has a story. And I encourage young people to investigate it. We have a Sunflower County Film Academy that helps students do exactly that. And so talk to your parents, your grandparents. Don't put the earbuds in. Don't let your eyes glaze over when they're telling you your history. Listen and document it because there is so much to be learned from it.
So as you were digging in to find out all this information as a now professional filmmaker and researcher and journalist, what piece of information really stood out for you? I'm curious, Monica, as someone who has a family tie.
How extensive and far-reaching her influence was. When we started this project, our senior researcher, Dr. Megan Parker Brooks, had pretty much laid the foundation. Telling the story in Aunt Fannie Lou's words wasn't really, and I hope I don't contradict Joy, it wasn't really a problem necessarily because we knew we had the footage. The problem was putting it in chronological order because there was just so much of it. But when we started looking for more footage, we found more and more and more. It's almost like, a flood. It just kept coming. We found so much by mistake. And so the majority of the footage did not support the personal life, the family life that I had wanted to focus on, but it was about her activism. And so knowing that she was introduced by David Frost, by Brinkley, by Cronkite, by Irv Cups, and she had these conversations with these people. That was tremendous, to me. Phil Donahue, she was on the Phil Donahue show. She was on Black Journal. I mean, there was actually literally so much footage, we couldn't even use it all. I mean, this film just literally, is just the tip of the iceberg. There was just so much footage, so much audio. So to know how extensive, her reach, her presence was, to me, was surprising.
Joy, what was the one thing that surprised you? I know you were coming to it a different way, but yet you were steeped in the material. Is there one piece that stood out to you particularly?
In terms of learning something about Fannie Lou Hamer, I think that it was, honestly, that wasn't surprising, but it was just my favorite thing. It was something that I was just delighted to find, was this forum, this Black Journal forum, I think it was 1973, that included all of these people, all of the, like, we would look at like founders of various parts of the culture and the movement going forward. You had the Congressional Black Caucus, you had an economic caucus, you had the radicals, and seated at the radical table was Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer and Stokely Carmichael and Dr. Angela Davis. And it's just like, this is who Fannie Lou Hamer aligned herself with. And this is where she was remembered in the moment. And she always found herself aligned with the radicals. And that's what brought me to her story. That's why I felt so drawn to this, is that this was somebody who would want to deal with me, not somebody who, as an older generation, would look at me as somebody with my hair on fire, but like, no, seeing something genuine in young folks, radical folks who really want to just like overturn the apple cart. So that whole appearance, I could have put all 90 minutes of that appearance in the film. That's not how films work, but that to me was just absolutely delightful.
I understand. So now to you activists and social justice workers. Mimi, one of the strong things about Mrs. Hamer, as you saw in the film, and if you read more about her, is that she was bound and determined to make sure that she was passing that torch on to young organizers and making it clear to the people around her what organizing meant. And the number one thing that it means that I don't know that a lot of people, but you all do know, is that it's a long game. It's not today, it's not 2 weeks, it's not 2 months, might not be 5 years. I wonder if you'd speak to watching that film, understanding as you do from the work that you do, that it's a long game, and what you took away from her story in that way.
I really, really appreciate this question, Callie. And, you know, I'm gonna say this in kind of my flavor and my style. I have been fortunate enough to be doing this work and kind of fell into this work, or this work found me, for over 15 years now. And starting off in this work as a young person, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had to really listen and learn and be open. But what attracted me to this work, and what attracted me to her story, was it didn't start with like, I'm ready to run for politics and get involved politically. It was, we need to fight for what our struggles are right before us and right in front of our face, right? I picked up when she spoke about food insecurity on multiple occasions throughout the film, when she talked about worker and housing conditions. Those issues are issues, unfortunately, I have to just say, that our communities are still faced with now, right? In different ways and in different forms. And what I took away with was her courage and persistence. She wasn't worried about what people felt about her, wasn't worried about, is this the right word? Is this the right phrase? She knew that she had to be a voice, and that voice meant her and her personal experience, but the experience that she knew was happening all around her. And I think that's really important. I know that we want change tomorrow, right? And we work towards that. It's not that simple. And I think in the line of work that we do, and wearing my direct organizing hat, we have to be okay with meeting people where they're at. And not everybody is ready to like turn the tables, but they're angry. They're frustrated, but they're also full of hope, right? And so it's this delicate dance of, how do we take people's anger and frustration and turn it into ways that they can take action, but action that they can feel, and action that they can see right in front of them, because that's what's going to drive them to want to be involved in this work more. So I stepped into that in a real way. And I was sharing this with some of the folks that shared the film earlier. I cried, I laughed, I cried some more. Monica, when you talk about the healing space that folks had to take and even putting this together, I feel that, right? And what I appreciate is, again, just everyone needs to know her story, and everyone needs to channel their own power in their story.
Got it. Mm-hmm. I think we have a little technical thing with maybe some
are not simple issues.
All right. Okay. Very good. I'm moving over to you, Christine. Same question, but I want to add just something else, because your focus has been so long on mobilizing the vote And of course, that is how she got involved with the civil rights organizers and then made that, the central part of her life. So how does it strike you, just looking at the level of commitment, and what do you take away from her story?
Yeah, you know what? It goes back to the issue that I think a lot of organizations always are thinking about and need to address, is that whole pipeline development in terms of how, especially for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, where the majority of the community are first generation immigrants. So we really rely many times for the younger generation who may understand what is happening, especially in terms of understanding how democracy works, and how does, even, especially in 2020, all the different confusing and changes that constantly was happening at the state level in terms of how to vote, even to access the ballot box. The role of the younger folks actually was really important and crucial, especially during the pandemic when families were together. And so there was a lot more synergy in terms of talking about politics, talking about issues and what we're seeing on the news, and processing it together as a family. I thought it was really powerful in terms of having multi-generational folks actually coming together. The other thing is, because we're such a new generation of immigrants, language access has always been an issue for our community. And so as they continue to grow in double digits across the country. So they're no longer just on the East and West Coast, but as we saw, like in Georgia and now in Texas, these are new areas where the voter suppression is actually, quite rampant. And there's new laws really trying to block new voters being able to access the ballot box. And so there's a lot of huge concerns of that. But once again, we're going to also be leaning on a lot of the young generation who could actually help in terms of mobilizing around that.
Okay. Tanisha, same question to you.
I think, for me, this documentary is a powerful testimony of hope and determination to ensure that America truly does deliver on her promise of freedom, justice, and equality for all of us. And a reminder that road is long. And as a result, it is critically important, again, that the stories are told, so that as each generation takes our turn at moving forward on this journey, that we understand that we are building on top of a foundation, right? We're not starting this work anew. I also think it's important that when we are sharing these stories, particularly those as it relates to the fight for the right to vote, that we are doing, as Mimi, you highlighted this, that we are doing, that we are making the connection between the problems that and the inequity that so many of our communities are still facing: economic inequality, education inequity, health disparities, and the right to vote, right? And the exercise of that right. So it's not lost on me that as those issues were amplified by Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, that the solution she saw and fought for was the right to vote and political power, right? That's in so doing, self-determination. So I think that, yes, just to highlight, Callie, as you mentioned, the importance of bringing along, ensuring that in the movement, that it is multi-generational, and that we all understand that we are building in this movement.
So one last question to all of you before we go to audience questions, and that is this. I think people look at the work of a Fannie Lou Hamer, they look at the work that you all do who are activists in this conversation, and they see some of the social justice gains being rolled back or undermined, and they wonder where you can derive hope. But Mrs. Hamer, through everything that she went through, always expressed hope, which I just found both shocking and amazing. And so I wonder, Tanisha, you're smiling. I'll let you start. How do you respond to that?
Absolutely, because I mean that is the gift, right? And what I share with people all the time is that hope is not just an emotion, it's an action word. Right? So it's not just about feeling hopeful, it's about doing hopeful. Right? And when we start to lose hope, then that's where I think progress gets stalled, because the work toward, again, freedom, justice, and equality is not only a long road, it's a hard road. And so maintaining hope and looking for hope, and doing hope, is what allows us to get from one point to the next. And so I loved that part, of the story, because it resonates with me. It's something that keeps me moving, in the work even today.
Christine.
I think everyone has a role. And, we recognize, especially during this pandemic, some people are stepping up, some people had to step back. But if everyone can think about what type of action that they could take, what kind of conversations that they could have with their immediate family and friends to make it relevant. So I think it goes back to, once again, it seems like 2020 was so long ago, but it really wasn't. And how can we just make the connections in terms of the things that you may be upset about, but what is the hope that in terms of what you can do with your family and friends, and what is that immediate action that you can take? And once again, it's all about whatever size or whatever fits what is happening in your life will actually help us build as a community. I think is when we lose sight that, I can't do anything because I don't have enough time. That's when that's actually can be destructive. So we really need to encourage that everyone does have a role as we move forward, not just about this 2022 elections, but also continuously on. I think that's where people are getting mixed up in terms of that it's only something that they do once every 4 years. But in reality, these solutions really means engaging with the community day in and day out to find those solutions.
Mimi.
No, I really appreciate you. I think a couple things come to mind. I think I like, Tanisha, how you said hope is an action word. And Christine, you talked about everybody finding a role. I also think, as Fannie kind of presented, she used the word that I highlighted, and she said a human justice. And I'm going to add the word agenda, right? And that the agenda has to be multi-generational, multicultural, right? Like we have to look from within and understand, how do we allow folks that are most impacted to lead, but that we actually need a larger net of us fighting for justice and fighting for change. And so I open us to thinking about the importance of that, because we can't do this work alone. And then the other thing that I'll just bring into it is we got to make time for that love and healing space. For folks that know me, I'm not too much of a touchy-feely person, right? But this work is hard. And if you don't make the time, you're not going to be able to last through it. And so we have to honor that by honoring each other's time and respecting that time, and when people need to take a step back.
Monica, I'll let you have the last word on hope and your aunt before we move into audience questions.
Well, the only thing that I can say or add to that is that Aunt Fannie Lou certainly had that. To me, she was the embodiment of that, and she demonstrated that. I'm not sure who said it. I believe it was Gandhi, to be the change you hope to see, or that you want to see. And so she just didn't tell people, well, you should go do this and you should go do that. She was in the forefront. She went with them. In fact, she even had a saying, I don't want you to say I'm behind you. You could be 200 miles behind. I want you to say I'm with you. And so, she did have hope. She had hope for others. She wanted so much for everyone, not just Black or white, for everyone. And so that's something that I think is admirable, is that she believed in working with people. And that, again, as so many of them have said, it's action. And she presented that. And I really do appreciate that about her.
Okay. Well, we're going to take some audience questions, and Susan's going to help facilitate some of that so that we can hear what the participants would like to know about.
Thank you. If any folks have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll just sort of repeat after you. Right here. If you want to go ahead and stand up and then, sure.
For you working, are you finding that it's more difficult since the pandemic and can't, people are hesitant to get together in person to get your work done? Or are you finding it's not as difficult because we can use the internet and use Zooms and you could possibly get more people actively involved in things? Which are you finding that say get on the phone and things like that?
Not sure if you're able to hear that, but I'll repeat. Would it be helpful for me to repeat it?
I actually heard it, so I can repeat.
Great.
So the question is, and this is to the activists in the room, is it, has it been, because it's difficult in the pandemic for any of us to get together, has it been more difficult for you all from an organizing perspective to try to bring people together, or has working through the internet been somewhat successful? Anybody, any one of you may take that.
I would say that the ability to connect virtually has, in my experience, in our experience, has been helpful in bringing more people into the work. But of course, because people can connect, for those who can connect. At the same time, what we recognized during the pandemic is just how deep the connectivity and digital divide is, even here in Massachusetts. So yes, I found that there was greater opportunity and greater interest in participating, but at the same time, it amplified yet another issue, again, just how deep the digital divide is, even here in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I just also want to jump in as a reminder that a lot of the nonprofits that, especially who are social service agencies, they never stopped engaging directly with their clients. So if anything, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, they actually ended up engaging more so because they were servicing their clients, engaging them on a wide variety of different issues. And as a way, it sort of deepened the relationship for some of these communities. But at the same time, also the Zoom and, these type of internet virtual platforms also allowed us to also expand our reach.
I kind of experienced something different. A lot of our work is on the ground, and a lot of the way that we communicate and build with residents is going door to door and talking with folks one-on-one. And so our organization completely, and many of the groups that we work with, in particular with civic engagement organizations, we had to pause, shift, and get creative with how do we continue to engage residents. We're very fortunate with some of the tools where we were able to continue to engage with community, but a lot of the virtual work didn't work for a lot of the residents that we represent. We have a lot of elders in our neighborhoods that were just learning how to use their internet for the first time, right? And so it took a lot of hands-on, a lot of rolling up our sleeves and getting in where we could to educate residents on some of the technical tools so that they can stay involved. But we've seen some beautiful work happen at a moment of crisis. And, I appreciate the fact that we even have these features like Zoom available.
Okay, very good.
Good evening, my name is Cynthia Francis, and I'm a civic leader in Topic Hobbit Triangle in my community. I happen to become a civic leader because of in the 90s, 80s, how the policing addressed our Black young men in the community. It was almost like you couldn't walk down the street, you couldn't function in your community without being harassed. And we had this group of policemen called the jump out team. They just jump out and harass our people. We formed a network of mothers to, when we saw this happening, we would call and make sure we, grab our sons and identify our sons and let them recognize they have homes that they legitimately should be in this neighborhood. That being said, moving forward, it was a help heal by leading by example, and by having community meetings, and by being an activist in the community and letting them know the powers that they have some control about who comes in our neighborhood, who builds in our neighborhood, and voting. That being said, I find myself feeling, our DNA, we don't have to live with our families to have to share their DNA, which shares the pain, which shares, a lot of trials and tribulations. And I feel like a lot of people can't move forward because they're still grieving over atrocities and things that happened in the past. And I just want to know how, if any ways, have you been able to implement some mental health, some ways of helping people heal and move through griefs and move through past and move forward? Because I feel like some of us get stuck, and and when it's time to get busy and work, there's always, oh, it ain't gonna work, or this one happened over here, and so instead of moving and stop looking back and like Lot's wife, but move forward, and keep the work going. I just find like there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of lack of hope, and we just want to. And to me now, it's about mental health. How do we bring mental health in our Black community to heal from things that they've seen? Little children now are used to hearing gunshots, and it don't even bother them. Are hearing screams and fights. Quiet communities are almost a scary community. So I said a lot, but I just said that to say that how can we heal people forward?
Susan, I think I got the question. It was a personal story about having organized and been in the trenches doing a lot of this work and having witnessed a lot of pain and trauma that the Black community has gone through while these things are happening. And of course, it was worse during COVID. And the question from the audience member is, she feels now that the issue really is mental health, of just trying to deal with the trauma before you can get to the question of trying to organize yourself to respond in an organized fashion to the trauma. And if you have thoughts about resources or ways in which we put that together and move forward, who would like to take that? Understanding none of you are mental health experts, but you are organizing and working with people, so.
Yeah. So about 5 years ago, in the NAACP Boston branch, we recognized the need for greater mental health supports, specifically in communities of color, and the need to really destigmatize getting mental health supports. And so we started working with McLean Hospital to do some work in communities, specifically communities of color. And so I really do appreciate that question, and I'd say a few things. One, we do need to help ensure that there are more mental health resources available. This goes to mental wellness resources available. This goes to Mimi's point about the healing spaces that we need to have in community, because there has been so much trauma within vulnerable communities, like so many of ours. I also think, one of the things that we experienced during COVID here in Massachusetts that I think was very positive were increased pathways to access mental health supports. So, providing people with virtual options to connect with therapists, and giving therapists the opportunity for cross-licensing. And so my point here is yes to everything that the audience members shared, but I do believe there's still more work for us to do, again, in communities to destigmatize, but also to ensure that from a health equity standpoint, that folks have access to the supports that we need.
And to underscore what Tanisha said, on a very practical basis, the community health centers were able to successfully get some of the COVID relief fund money to get access to those telehealth services that you mentioned. And that's been extremely helpful for people who are looking for those kinds of resources. And again, those are places where people are aware that there are some cultural connections that need to be made as well while you're doing that. I think I lost Susan.
I'm still here. I just figured we can actually see you all better without me.
If you didn't have questions, I have a little story I want to tell before we end, so you let me know.
It looks like 2 questions. I don't know if you have time for both, Ellen. We have time for one more question, and then maybe we'll leave it to Callie to wrap up.
Okay.
I'm wondering if anybody can say anything about the gender dynamics of the Freedom Democratic Party. You know, it was a huge problem in the Black Panther Party, a huge problem with SNCC. And as we saw, there were 4 female candidates, right? So anybody, you know, shed light on that, say anything about what you found in your research and all the footage and stuff?
Joy, why don't you take that? And we can say it exists. I'll start that way and let Joy pick up on it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there was a mixed bag of things that I discovered in the research. There was the kind of expected misogyny that a lot of movement members experienced. You know, if you were a woman in the movement, you were almost automatically assigned to be a secretary, whereas the field secretaries were all men. And that was a constant frustration for a lot of volunteers. But I found specifically within the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was Mrs. Hamer's organization. She was one of the founders, as was Ella Baker, as were many men. And so within that party specifically, I found that there was a better sense of equality between the genders. And I found that it was complicated, as everything is, sort of by the generation that this was taking place and the ways that people interpreted what we've come to call feminism or the kind of need for equity between genders. But Mrs. Hamer was a leader, and that was accepted. That wasn't questioned within the MFDP. It was definitely questioned outside of the MFDP by more institutional leaders, but within the MFDP, she was the figurehead and they recognized her as the boss. And so my mentor was Lawrence Guiot, who was the first chairman of the MFDP, and he was a massive booster of Mrs. Hamer. So was Bob Moses. So were many of the men who worked within the movement. So it kind of depended on which community you're talking about. Within this small, radical, truly grassroots group that knew the folks they were working with, those gender relations were much better. But then when you get to the more media managed, institutionally focused groups that were sort of trying to sell something to the nation, the misogyny was as you might expect.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I guess it's my time. So to share with you that, because the film is fantastic, I knew about Mrs. Hamer as a tween and possibly a little bit younger, because I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and there was a very powerful and strong at that time NAACP Youth Council, and they did a lot to talk to us about it. So fast forward, I'm a baby reporter, my first job at home in Memphis, Tennessee, and Mrs. Hamer dies. And I say to one of my friends, I must go to her funeral. And she says, you don't know her, but you'll never get in. Everybody's coming from around the world, as you know, you saw in your footage. And I said, I must go to this funeral. We must go. And she said, well, you're crazy. I'm not going to go. Well, anyway, long story short, the day before I decided I was going to go, because Ruleville wasn't that far from Memphis, Tennessee, she said, I'll go with you. So we drove very early. I wanted to get there because I didn't know the lay of the land. The tiniest church for the funeral. People were coming from around the world. I want to emphasize that, in this teeny tiny church. And so what I did was, cleverly, if I must say, attach myself to the network correspondent from CBS, because my station was a CBS station. And I said to my friend, let's just act like we're part of the crew, because they had big crews. So we got into the church, and I'm very close to the front, and I'm in your film. So when you go back and look and listen to what Vernon Jordan is saying, there is a sweep of the crowd, and there I am in a very bright yellow sweater. And I couldn't be more thrilled that being in that church that day for 5-6 hours of the funeral, which ended with Andrew Young. I mean, 6 hours we'd been there. And Andrew Young is the last voice, and he goes up to the podium and he puts his head down and he almost weeps and he brings his head up and he just starts singing, "This little light of mine," and we lost our minds. We lost our minds. We just lost our minds. It was the most powerful, the most meaningful, the most significant thing I have experienced in my life. And I thank you for bringing her story to light. And there I am in your film.
That's so incredible.
That's amazing. That is totally amazing.
Thank you so much for everything you had to say tonight. And I know the audience enjoyed the film as much as I did. And thanks so much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Susan has to say something.
Yes, thank you so
Thank
much,
you for
Kelly.
having us.
Oh, this was so fantastic, and Kelly, that story just, oh, like the tears are returning. I feel like the universe is speaking. Monica, the 10 years that you've invested to get this story told, you know, is giving us this opportunity for us to walk with Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer in her journey, to continue her walk, to be with her in that, and for us to continue her story and to get more stories out there for all of us. I think as part of this series is called Shared Stories, for all of us to attach and make connections to her story and to share with others your own story so that other people know why you care, why it's important, why we're here, and how we connect with one another. I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists as well, both Tanisha, Mimi, and Christine, for your tireless effort. Your work precedes you, and just the reputation and the path that you continue. For me, seeing the connections between Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer and your work that you do today is so inspiring. So thank you so much for your commitment to that, for the work that you have embedded here in the greater Boston area. It's been truly amazing. And definitely not last and not least, Monica and Joy, for just so much commitment to getting to this. Congratulations. This is really, I think many of us, the audience here, celebrates with you for this momentous occasion in this sort of, you know, world exclusive premiere of your film and ahead of its PBS broadcast. We thank you so much for your commitment to telling the story and getting it done right. Just maybe another round of applause from the audience. To have you all here and see you in person at some time. I just want to make a note that for GBH World, on behalf of them, they really hope that you will help spread the word about this unheralded civil rights leader. Please tell everyone you know about the film premiere coming this Tuesday on GBH, they rebranded, sorry, GBH, and it starts streaming for free on pbs.org and the PBS app. So do get the word out, tell everyone. Again, Callie, thank you so much for helping to lead in this wonderful panel and moderation. Your skills, I am always so amazed by the grace and touch and really just the essence of thoughtfulness and compassion and just curation that you brought us through this panel today. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Actually, in terms of telling more stories, Arts Emerson is also presenting the story of Miriam Makeba, who is also another story that has been long lost and buried in our history. We are presenting a story, Dreaming Zanzile, here on Emerson stage, featuring musical artist Somi. So we invite you to take a look at that program coming up. We will be returning next month with another shared stories called Try Harder that will be offered virtually. We're kind of doing this combination of offering opportunities both virtually and in person to kind of, as we transition through this time through COVID and trying to return back to being together. Starting tomorrow, we are also presenting a documentary called Curtain Up, which also had previously shown on PBS, which follows a group of elementary school students in New York's Chinatown as they present a stage production of Disney's Frozen Kids, which is sort of much heart-lifting. And for those of you who may be on school vacation next week, it's streaming for free. All of this can be found on artsemerson.org. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have flyers that you can grab outside, both for Fannie Lou Hamer's America, as well as the shared stories coming up this spring and projecting connections as well. So with that, I will close. And again, thank you so much to Callie, our panelists, and to Joy and Monica for being with us tonight and sharing your insights and helping really further make connections towards Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer's story and lifelong journey. And thank you all for joining us here today. And my gratitude to be able to see all of you in person tonight. Thank you.